So today we are continuing the idea of consistency and predictive patterns and how we can create predictive patterns that help us, especially when they are in the zone of regulation. As you're listening today, I want you to think of the habits that you have and ask yourself, are my habits helping me stay regulated? Or are my habits maybe contributing to some of the dysregulation and stress in my life? I'm giving you some good ideas of why predictive patterns are good and help us stay regulated, and some of my predictive patterns that keep me in my zone of regulation. Welcome to Burnout Solutions. My name is Mona Tippett. I am a registered nurse, a life coach, an emotional resiliency expert, and a mom. I love to help healthcare workers and caretakers and just busy, capable people understand their brain and nervous system so stress, overwhelm, and frustration do not run their life. Here on this podcast, we break down burnout, emotional overload, and survival patterns in simple human language. I love to give you practical ways to feel safer, calmer, and more present in your everyday life. You do not need fixing. What you need is support and a nervous system that knows that it's safe. Thanks for being here. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I have been thinking a lot about how healthcare workers and those who are in the caring profession in any way, that includes parents, teachers, high achievers, those who are paid actually to care for other people. Sorry, parents, you're not paid, but thanks for doing all that you do. We are very good at caring for other people. We know how to assess our patients. We know how to respond quickly. We know how to anticipate the needs of other people. And really, we're really good at showing up for our patients, our students, our coworkers, our family, mostly because we've been trained to do that. And that is what we do all day long. However, I have found when it comes to taking care of ourselves, I really feel like that was not taught or even modeled to us. And because we've been trained to care for other people, often our focus is outward. And when it comes to turning inward and caring for ourselves, it feels off. There's resistance, there's a big buzzword of self-care, and we don't know how to do that. And really, self-care is different than the traditional thoughts that come from self-care. I'm going to talk about that in another podcast later. But we often feel stuck or we don't know how to do it because it doesn't feel natural. And this is where we often get into patterns of overthinking or procrastinating, or we avoid and we just put off taking care of ourselves, or it feels too overwhelming, like it's just one more thing to do. And that's where I want to talk about today, is how we can create predictive patterns of regulation that often don't really take more time and require more of us to add into our day or our week. And when they do, I believe it is well worth the effort to take that time and to spend that energy to do so. And I talk a lot about this in my presentations to healthcare workers and to teachers. I actually teach at the professional development days at my local school district. It's actually the largest school district in Idaho, and it's been really fun. But I'm going to share some concepts today about how we can use and create habits or predictive patterns and why we should create those habits in regulation. Deb Dana is a huge guru in the application of polyvagal theory. And she talks about anchoring yourself in regulation. And once we are anchored in regulation, we can flex and sway and move throughout our day, but we're always anchored in caring for ourselves and keeping ourselves as regulated as possible, expanding our window of tolerance, stretching ourselves so that we can handle more stress without breaking and burning out. And when we can create good habits of regulation throughout our day, that is a huge key in caring for ourselves so that we can show up better for those around us. So let's get into how our nervous system and our brain work together to create good predictive patterns. In the last few episodes, I've talked about how we can give ourselves an out when our brain comes up with these really good, logical, true excuses, but they put a wrench in becoming the person that we want to be. So let's talk for just a little bit about how the prefrontal cortex works. The prefrontal cortex is the place where we make our decisions. It is where hope lives, where values live, our goals. It is where all of our creativity is. It's a big problem-solving part of our brain. Because our prefrontal cortex is so good at solving problems, it wants to create predictive patterns to reduce that emotional load. Remember, we've talked about the motivational triad. It wants to conserve energy, avoid pain, and seek pleasure. And one of those ways is to just create a habit or a pattern that is easy to follow. This helps our prefrontal cortex efficiently manage all of the information that it's given. So this speeds up the decision making. It helps reduce uncertainty. It helps us anticipate future needs and events based on the past. It also helps us with our emotional regulation and learning and all of that stuff. Now, this pattern, for the most part, works really well for us, but sometimes it doesn't. So just keep in mind that that's how it naturally wants to work. A lot of times, some people's brains spiral and goes into anxiety of trying to predict all of these things that could happen in the future, and that's not helpful. I find that it's really helpful just to know that that's what our brain's job is to create these predictive patterns and help us conserve energy. But sometimes those patterns work against us. So we're not going to talk about that today. And I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but we're going to talk about the benefits of these predictive patterns. So when our brain can create these patterns or habits, we have faster processing and more accuracy, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, we've done this before. When we have increased efficiency, the brain really does reduce a cognitive load by focusing only on errors. Now, this is super interesting. So it says this is different between what I expected and what actually happens. So I'm going to gather that information and try and solve that problem. Again, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. When these predictions fail, the brain gradually updates its models and we can learn quicker and sharpen our accuracy, which can reduce stress and improve decision making. So again, we're trying to use all of the ways that our prefrontal cortex works for our benefit. Now, our brain and our prefrontal cortex is super powerful, but it has limits. And I find with people who are high achievers is that those limits come, and often those limits come when it's caring for ourselves. And so every time we ask ourselves, how should I care for myself? Should I work out today? What should I eat? When should I do this? We are tapping into that limited capacity of our prefrontal cortex. And so by the end of the day, because we've made so many decisions, because we've, prioritized and helped our patients or our students or our kids, that by the end of the day, we really are depleted. So I want you to understand that decisions are not neutral. They actually do create a cognitive load on our brain. And when our brain perceives these questions and these thoughts, and what should I do? How should I care for myself? It creates uncertainty, which can be interpreted as stress and often is. So you're not just mentally tired, but now you're tired and slightly dysregulated, and it puts you into a state of protection. And this happens all day, and it just doesn't help our stress load, right? It adds to it. So now let's transition into how can we create some habits that are regulating and help us take care of ourselves. So we want to create these healthy habits to become automatic, because it has shown that people who age well, they tend to have offloaded a lot of our decisions to routines. It's efficiency, and it's creating habits that help you. When we can create these healthy behaviors and they can become automatic, which guess what? Research shows that it can take 66 to 250 days of repetition. So that is a long time that it can take our brain to rewire, to create these new habits and these new patterns that help us. And once we do that, it frees up our space and our prefrontal cortex can focus on using that energy to be creative, to connect with those around us, to learn, to problem solve, and to care for other people. How our brain does that is it does something called cognitive scaffolding. And it's really simply just that you create external structures that support your brain so it doesn't have to work so hard. So instead of relying on willpower, motivation, or constant decision making, you help yourself build systems that hold you up. Just like scaffolding around a building supports construction, your routines and your habits support your thinking, your behavior, and your energy. And while we create these habits, I encourage you to create these habits in regulation. So I wanted to transition into how and why these predictive patterns actually help regulate our nervous system and help us perform our best. So the first is that when we create predictive patterns in regulation, they reduce uncertainty. Because remember, our nervous system is always asking, am I safe here? Am I dangerous? It wants to help predict what is coming next. And when everything requires a decision, it puts your system a little bit on edge and actually adds to our stress load. But when we have those patterns, your body starts to learn, okay, I know what happens here. I know what's going on. I can plan around this. And especially during stressful times, when we can keep our routines going, it helps eliminate that extra demand on our brain and helps keep us regulated. So one example that I've thought about that helps reduce uncertainty that I look back over my life and I have always done is I've always gone to church every single Sunday. When I was growing up, my parents raised me to do that, and I continue. Now, I am a person who believes that our mental health, our spiritual health, our emotional health, physical health, all of those are intertwined. And I find that I show up better when I keep my routine of going to church every Sunday. I like taking that pause from my busy week, and I highly prioritize my relationship with deity. And so for me, it has been very helpful. Now, this routine doesn't change when I travel. I've gone to church in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Puerto Rico, in different states. And lucky for me, I have a app on my phone that I say where I am. It shows me the building, the time of the meeting, the location, and it makes it really easy. So I have the routine of I go to church every Sunday. So how do I make that happen when I'm on vacation? How do I stick to that routine to help my nervous system feel safe throughout my week? In addition, with religious habits, we gather as a family every night and we say our prayers, we read our scriptures, we talk about our day, we talk about the next day. And this has been a good anchor for myself and my husband to run our family system. And now that we have 4 teenagers, not every night is every single person there, but it just helps create a routine and a way of this is how our family runs. And that predictability helps create calm and a system. And it's already decided that that's what we're doing. And so I'm not spending that mental energy every day of what are we doing at the end of the night, or every Sunday, what am I doing? And again, safety comes from predictability. So the second reason why predictive habits help us is they, again, lower our cognitive load because every decision uses energy. And when we're already making those decisions all day long, even the small ones feel draining. And one of the biggest places I see this in my own life that sometimes I get out of the habit, and I don't know why, but it is when it comes to food. When I do not plan a menu for the 6 people in my family, I constantly have that question lingering in the back of my mind, like, what is for dinner tonight? Do I need to take meat out of the freezer? Do I need to cut something up? Do I need to start something in the crock pot? And I have found when I spend the few minutes on Sunday planning my menu, making a grocery list, that helps me. Otherwise, I end up going to the store 3 or 4 times a week. I'm buying food for one meal at a time. And this takes more time out of my week. It takes more energy. It takes more decision making. When I don't plan my menu, it's more, okay, let's stop and pick up something to eat that wasn't on my menu plan. And then we eat food that's junky and does not contribute to my overall health. And that adds to our allostatic load. So really, I do encourage all of my clients to take your eating seriously and plan a little bit. Then the decision is done and your brain can rest. The other way that predictive patterns help is that they create safety through repetition, right? When something happens the same way over and over and over again, it lays down that predictive track. It strengthens that neuroplasticity. It strengthens that pattern. And again, we want to create a pattern in safety because your body will start to trust it. And this is where our regulation really can build. Now, for me, another habit that I really do and is important to me is exercise. So physical. I like to work out in the morning. I have always worked out early in the morning. I find that it fits my routine better. I can complete my stress cycle. I get outside of this house. I interact with other people, or I can put on a podcast or do something while I'm exercising, and it sets me up for success. The other day, it was on a Saturday, and I've been spending lots of Saturdays working out with one of my good friends, and she wasn't there that day. And my husband asked me, "Are you going to go to the gym today? Because your day always just seems to go better when you do." And I thought, yeah, actually, you're right. It does. And so, it's not just about the workout. It is that my body expects it. It helps it. It is familiar. And it is regulating for me. I talked a little bit about this next one in the last few podcasts, but when we can create predictive patterns, they reduce internal negotiation. And this one is so big, but without patterns, our brain is constantly negotiating. And sometimes we want a pattern and then our brain comes up with all these ideas like, oh, but I'm too tired. This happened. And even though they're logical and believable, we don't create that consistency. And we ask ourselves, should I go? I don't feel like it. Maybe later. And that back and forth is, again, a demand on our prefrontal cortex, on our nervous system, and it can be exhausting. But when it's a habit, we don't debate it and we can flexibly say, okay, how can I still do this in any amount? I've mentioned this before, but my husband and I go on walks on most nights. And we've started that it's been about 6 months. And it has helped us with our relationship. It has helped us just kind of end our day a little bit better. And it doesn't happen perfectly. Usually he or I will say, hey, when are we going on our walk? Let's do it now, or let's do this now. And it's mostly just what we do. There's less conversation about it. And we still have our 4 teenagers who are very involved in lots of things, and we still manage to fit it in. And there's just not that negotiation, and there's more follow through, especially with a partner, which is why I love having accountability partners, which is part of what a coach does for you. Okay, so the last one is when we have predictive patterns, they can help move us out of the nervous system of freeze and into actually doing action. Because when everything feels like a decision, our brain can shut down. When we are in freeze, it's 2 opposing forces at once where we feel like we really, really have to do something, but we don't know what, or we're just not doing it. And this can be overwhelming. It can lead us to decision fatigue because we're just thinking about things back and forth, but we're not taking the action. And often there's not enough structure, and it's easier to give ourselves an out. And I've thought about this with charting as one of the things I always did when I worked full-time as a nurse is I made sure that my charting was done before I left the hospital. And recently, my husband had to do his charting from home Our son graduated last week and he left the hospital immediately so he could get there, and he didn't finish his charts. So he came home, he logged into his computer, and his computer wasn't working. It wasn't loading. And he had to call the help desk and say, my computer's not working. And they said, oh, well, you need to log into your computer at least every 6 months. And I thought, wow, that's actually like really good. That tells us that you haven't had to do your charting from home in over 6 months because you have a pattern. And your brain doesn't even have to think about it anymore. It says, I do my work at work. And then when I come home, I'm moving on. And what I love to help with my one-on-one clients and even in my groups is how can you create a habit that ends your work and starts something different? Like, can you change your clothes? Can you walk in the house, take off your shoes, take a cool glass of water? Are you doing your box breathing on your way home? What do you do to create a regulating habit in between your work and the rest of your life? With teachers, when I give my lecture there, I say, okay, how can you regulate with every class that starts? If you're in middle school or high school, have a regulating activity at the beginning that you can decompress and not bring what happened in second period into third period. Help your kids regulate, because who knows what happened in the hall or what their day is going on, but let's regulate together at the beginning of every classroom. I like to regulate in between each of my clients. And I box breathe, I stand up, I stretch. I like to make sure that I'm showing up as regulated as possible so that my clients can feel that regulation from me and they can co-regulate. Often, if I can see that they're a little stressed or, we're late, I'd like to slow things down. Let's do our box breathing. Let's get into a better space so that this session is productive and helpful to you. So, those are just some examples of how we can take some action and purposefully regulate. And I do want to tie this back into the last few podcasts I did where, consistency versus control. Control says, I need to do this perfectly, but consistency says, hey, I've already decided. I've already made this decision. Let's keep this decision going in any small way that we can to help support consistency without the pressure, without having to go back into that land of indecision. And I just want all of you to know that if this feels hard for you, you're not doing it wrong. You are just still in the decision phase. And that decision phase, I encourage you to get out of as soon as you can. When your brain is still negotiating, it can feel exhausting and it can really take a lot of your mental energy that you don't need to do, you can devote for something else. I like to tell myself, okay, what am I actually going to do? If I know that I'm really tired and I'm not going to get out of bed the next morning at 5:30 when my alarm clock goes off, I tell myself, okay, tomorrow we're going to get up at 6. And if I wake up at 5:30 and I feel great, I get up. But I like to keep those commitments with myself. I have a friend who is at the gym, and when I used to work out at 5:15, I saw him routinely, but I'm a little bit later now. And I asked him the other day, how do you just get out of bed? What is your pattern of making sure that you get out of bed every single day? And he said, when I turn over to turn off my alarm, my feet get out of bed and touch the floor. And that's what happens every single time. Alarm goes off, my feet go on the floor. I'm like, oh, that's so good. So when we can get out of that negotiation, when we can be better about keeping those small commitments and creating these habits of regulation, these habits of predictive patterns that help us decrease our stress a million times throughout the day, that is how we avoid burnout. And remember, we just don't need more discipline. We often need to make fewer decisions. And these protective patterns help us in 5 ways. 1, they reduce uncertainty. The second is they lower the cognitive load so that your prefrontal cortex can focus on the things that it's best at doing, like thinking, being creative, problem solving, connecting with the people that are around you, and being present. The third is they create safety in your nervous system through repetition and automation. The fourth is they reduce internal negotiation. And the last is they help move us out of freeze and actually into taking action. Routines aren't restrictive, but they help give our brains a break and let our brains focus on what it really needs to. It also helps our nervous system feel safe. And from that place, we just don't feel better, but we actually do show up differently and with more intention in our life. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful in why we want to create better habits that are anchored in regulation. So send me a note. What are your patterns of regulation? And if you want to evaluate the patterns that you have that maybe are not helping you stay regulated, I'd love to have a chat with you. So reach out to me on my website. Thanks for listening and take care. Every week, you're learning something new here on this podcast, and that is a powerful first step. But guess what? Information alone doesn't create transformation. True change happens when you start to think differently and shift the nervous system patterns that drive your behavior. As a coach and an emotional resiliency expert, that is the work I do. I love to walk alongside you, whether it's one-on-one, in a small group that you choose, or with your workplace team. I can help you retrain your brain and nervous system so that stress no longer runs the show. You'll find ways to connect with me in the show notes. Let's do this work together.